Okay, let's consider her argument. So she starts off with the violinist case, which I think is quite nice, or gels, well, quite nice with our imagination. So suppose there was a famous violinist, right? This famous violinist, you know, is really a benefit to society. Now, you're walking along the street and you get kidnapped. And then all of a sudden you wake up in a hospital and you look over to your right and you're connected to this famous violinist. Now, it turns out that the violinist does not have the means to survive by himself. Rather, he would need to remain connected to you and to use your kidneys to filter out his blood. For some elaborate reason, only you are a match for this type of surgical procedure. Nonetheless, you wake up and it's already been done. It's not the case that they're asking you if they can do it, it's already been done. Now, if you get disconnected from the violinist, he will die. One question is, should we disconnect, or should the person who's been kidnapped disconnect from the violinist? On the one hand, if you disconnect from the violinist will die. On the other hand, it seems like a great burden to you physically, but also perhaps if, say, you had to be connected for 9 months until he gets better, then you lose out on 9 months of your life. Perhaps you think maybe 1 day is okay. I would happily remain connected for 1 day in order for this person to survive. In which case, then perhaps Thomson would say that's a praiseworthy action, but not obligatory. If it's 9 months, it would also be praiseworthy. But I think when it's 9 months, a lot of people will start thinking that they would not remain connected to the violinist. What if it's 9 years? What if it's your whole life? Okay, so Thomson outright says, drawing upon our intuitions, at least drawing upon her intuitions, most people would say that it would be absurd that you have to be connected to the violinist. But I think there's a more salient question here. Another way of putting it is this more salient question, in answering it, we also answer the question of whether we are morally obligated or whether it's morally permissible for us to remain connected or disconnected from the violinist. The salient question is, does the violinist's right to trump? Sorry, that is correct. Does the violinist... Okay, no, that's not correct. It's possessive. Does the violinist's right to live trump your right to live? I think that's a salient question. Okay, to wake you guys up, I'm going to do a quick poll. Oops, maybe I have to do it from this computer. Okay, good. So I wonder if we all might answer differently. If you're on Zoom, then try to do this poll. I'll share the results with the class in a moment. So if you think the violinist's right to live trumps your right to live, then you should remain connected. Okay, 10 more seconds. Okay, going to share the results. Okay, people in class can't seem to see the results, but the results are this. We've got 9% saying yes, that the violinist's right does trump your right to live. That's interesting. Maybe it's because they're a famous violinist and they're a great benefit to society. But I haven't really said anything about who you are. Maybe you're a great benefit to society, albeit perhaps in a different way. That's 9%. We've got 3 people saying that the violinist's right does trump your right to live. Okay, we've got 18 plus 67. We've got 85% saying no. Now, 18% of the total sampled think that your right to live is actually greater than his right to live. Again, this strikes me as slightly surprising. What reason is there for your right to live trumping their right to live? And then, of course, the biggest proportion of answers is that your rights are equal. The violinist's right to live and your right to live are equal. And that's a no answer. And then, of course, we've got a few people who said, I don't know. Interesting. What's interesting about this is a few people said yes, and people said that your right to live trumps the violinist's right to live. Okay. Let's move on. I think one super relevant point that we have to make explicit is in the violinist case, you've been kidnapped. It's not the case that you volunteered to be a part of this procedure, but you're walking on the street and you were kidnapped and you woke up and you did not have a choice as to whether or not you want to be in this procedure. This is supposed to parallel cases in which pregnancies arise as a result of rape. So it was not the case that you consented to sexual intercourse. It was not the case that you wished to have a baby. But nonetheless, it was forced upon you in a way similar to a kidnapping. If, according to Thomson, in the violinist case, you're morally right to disconnect yourself from the violinist, then similarly, you would be morally right to abort the baby in cases that arise out of rape, or in cases of pregnancy that arise out of rape. That's her first point. Abortions are morally permissible under some circumstances. Some circumstances include pregnancies as a result of rape. Now, she returns to the traditional argument for abortion, gives an analysis of it, and says, actually, there's a missing premise somewhere, which is relevant to the present discussion. So here's the traditional argument again. Every person has a right to live. The fetus is a person. Therefore, the fetus has a right to live. Now, abortions infringe on the fetus's right to live, so abortions are morally impermissible. And Thomson thinks there's actually an implicit premise here, which I've called 4'. The fetus's right to live trumps the mother's right for bodily integrity. Notice that we've got 2 different types of rights here. We've got the right to live, but also the right for bodily integrity, which is more or less managing your own body and doing what you want to it. Okay. I think the violinist case is supposed to question this sort of implicit premise. Because in the violinist case, you're kidnapped. And you're put in this procedure against your will. The thinking is actually maybe your right for bodily integrity does trump the violinist's right to live. So here I have it put more explicitly. The violinist case is supposed to show that sometimes someone else's right to live does not trump your right for bodily integrity. Okay, that's the first circumstance. Pregnancies as a result of rape. There is a different circumstance, and it's illustrated by the case expanding baby in the house, or whatever it's called. So it's really quite a fantastical account, or a fantastical thought experiment. Suppose you're trapped in a house, and this child is in the house with you, but they're rapidly growing. Like every minute it exponentially grows, and it's getting bigger and bigger and bigger. Now, you're afraid that if the child continues to grow, then eventually he will start to crush you and break down the house. Now, one point here is the child is actually innocent. So he's not, say, trying to kill you or break down the house. And it's not the case that he put himself in this type of scenario where he is in the house and he's rapidly growing. He just happens to be there. Okay, you've got two options. You kill the child before it gets too big, and before it gets too big as to crush you, or you do nothing and the child will eventually kill you. Which action should we do? Now, it seems like the baby has a right to live, as people have rights to live. And it seems that you also have the right to live. So what now? Do we flip a coin? I mean, you might think, these rights are balanced, so in these cases, you should really flip the coin. But we can perhaps give it another analysis that involves a distinction that we've made before, which is letting die and killing. So in the case of doing nothing, if you're in the house and you do nothing, what's happening here is simply there is some letting die, namely, you are let die. But on the other hand, if you're killing the baby, then you are directly killing, after all. And maybe killing is worse than letting die. And so maybe you should just let die. That's one analysis that you can give. But it's actually not the one that Thomson thinks is right here. And certainly she does not think that it's morally impermissible to kill the baby in these cases. So now that I've presented this case, it seems analogous to a certain type of pregnancy. Does anyone have an idea of what that type of pregnancy might be? Suppose you're a mother, if the baby gets larger and larger, then you will die. Can somebody type it in the chat? Are we really all puzzled by this? You should know the answer if you've done the reading. Okay, good. We've got an answer that if you continue carrying the baby to term, then perhaps some physical harm will be done to the mother. I mean, this happens probably, more common than you might think. That is, if you carry the baby to term, then perhaps the mother won't survive the birth, won't survive the pregnancy, or at least have the harm at least have a lot of harm inflicted. Okay, so again, one person said maybe it's a case of where two people die versus one person dies. If you carry the baby to term, then it does harm to you and you die, but the baby dies as well. I think these cases can certainly happen, especially when there's no medical intervention. But I think in most cases, actually, the baby can survive and do survive. So the baby might kill the mother, but the baby survives. So I don't think it's a case of 2 versus 1. Or at least Thompson's not thinking about those cases. So let's say it's one person dying or the other person dying. Okay. So for Thompson, yes. But the mother has also the right to manage her own body. And so if suppose this were some scale, this would be weighted heavier. That is, the left-hand side, the mother's right to live, plus the mother's right for bodily integrity will outweigh the right-hand side of the scale, which is only the baby's right to live. Why does it outweigh? Because those two rights are exactly equal. The mother's right to live and the baby's right to live. But the mother's right for bodily integrity is something, and it's going to tip the scales towards the left. That's the idea. So, in sum, she thinks that there are actually 3 circumstances in which abortions can be morally permissible, but we've only talked about 2. The third one pertains to pollen screens in a house. But the first circumstance that we've talked about is pregnancies as a result of rape, and the second is pregnancies as a result of, or pregnancies that may cause the death of the mother if no abortion were performed. In most countries, actually, these 2 types of abortions are legal, even in quite religious countries, actually. Muslim countries or Christian countries allow these types of abortions. Okay,